The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September 1882, and when Julia Catherine unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, she felt her entire world collapse into a single, devastating sentence. Married Thomas. Yesterday. Stopped sister. Sends her love stop. Come home when you can stop mother. Julia stood in the dusty street of Red Bluff, California, the paper crumpling in her grip as shopkeepers and ranchers moved past her like ghosts. She had been gone for 8 months, caring for her dying aunt in Sacramento, 8 months of writing letters to Thomas Garrett every week, 8 months of planning their future together, their wedding, their life on his ranch just outside town. 8 months, and her younger sister Margaret had stolen everything that mattered. The stage ride back to Red Bluff from Sacramento had taken 2 days, and Julia had spent every mile imagining her reunion with Thomas, the way he would sweep her into his arms and tell her how much he had missed her. Instead, she stood alone on Main Street, watching the world continue as though nothing had changed, as though her heart had not just been ripped from her chest and trampled in the dirt. She walked to the hotel first, needing a room, needing somewhere to think before she faced her family. The Golden Bear Hotel stood on the corner of Main and Oak, its painted sign faded from years of harsh California sun. Julia pushed through the door, her traveling dress dusty from the road, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. The clerk behind the counter was a young man with spectacles and a nervous manner. "Miss Catherine," he said, his eyes widening with recognition and something that looked like pity. "We heard you were coming back." "I need a room," Julia said, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. "Just for tonight. Maybe longer. I have not decided yet." "Of course, Miss Catherine. Sign here, please." He pushed the register toward her, then hesitated. "I'm truly sorry about everything. The whole town has been talking about it. It is not right what happened." Julia signed her name with careful precision, not trusting herself to speak. She took the key he offered and climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, finding her room at the end of the hall. It was small and sparse, with a single bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. She set down her carpet bag and sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Thomas and Margaret. Margaret and Thomas. The words repeated in her mind like a cruel song. Her sister was 20 years old, 4 years younger than Julia, and had always been the prettier one, the charming one, the one who could make people laugh and forget their troubles. Julia had never minded, had never felt jealous, because she had Thomas, and Thomas had loved her. Or so she had believed. A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. Julia stood, smoothing her skirts, and opened the door to find a tall man standing in the hallway. He wore worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and dusty boots, with a hat in his hands, and concern in his gray eyes. "Miss Catherine," he said, his voice low and respectful. "I am Xander Owens. I work the cattle ranch just north of town. I heard you came back today, and I wanted to offer my condolences." Julia studied him, trying to place his face. She had seen him before, she realized, at church socials and town gatherings, always on the edges, always quiet and watchful. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. "That is kind of you, Mr. Owens," Julia said carefully, "though I am not sure condolences are appropriate. No one has died." "No, madam," Xander said, meeting her eyes directly. "But sometimes betrayal feels like death all the same. I lost someone important to me once. Not the same way, but I know that particular kind of pain. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in this town thinks what happened was acceptable." Julia felt something crack in her chest, the careful control she had maintained since reading the telegram finally breaking. "They got married," she whispered, "Thomas and my sister, while I was taking care of my aunt, while I was writing him letters about our future." "I know," Xander said quietly. "The whole town knows, and most folks are ashamed of it, even if they would not say so to your face. Thomas Garrett always did think too highly of himself. And your sister was young and foolish. But that does not make what they did hurt any less. Why are you here? Julia asked, sudden exhaustion washing over her. Why do you care what happened to me? Xander turned his hat in his hands, considering his words. Because I have watched Thomas Garrett swagger around this town for years, treating people like they owe him something, and I always wondered what you saw in him. And now you have been hurt by him. And I figure maybe you could use a friend, someone who is not part of all this mess, someone who can just listen if you need to talk. Julia looked at this stranger, this cowboy with kind eyes and honest words, and made a decision. Would you walk with me? I need to see my family eventually, but I am not ready yet. I need to clear my head first. It would be my honor, Miss Catherine, Xander said, stepping back to let her pass. They walked through Red Bluff as the afternoon sun stretched shadows across the dusty streets. The town sat in the Sacramento River Valley, surrounded by rolling hills that turned golden brown in the late summer heat. Julia had grown up here, knew every building and back alley, but today it all felt foreign, as though she was seeing it through different eyes. Tell me about your ranch, Julia said as they walked past the general store. I need to think about something other than my own troubles. Xander nodded, falling into step beside her. It is not much, just a small spread with about 200 head of cattle. I run it with my brother Marcus and 2 hired hands. We breed cattle mostly, sell to the bigger ranches, and to the buyers who come through in the fall. It is hard work, but honest work, and I like being able to see what I have built with my own hands. Do you like it? Julia asked. The ranching life? I do, Xander said, and she could hear the genuine pleasure in his voice. I like being outside, working with the animals, watching the seasons change. I like the quiet of it, the way you can think out there without 100 voices telling you what you should do or be. It suits me. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. Julia felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, the simple act of walking and being with someone who did not expect anything from her providing an unexpected relief. Where were you planning to go? Xander asked gently. When you married Thomas, I mean. His family ranch, Julia said, the words bitter in her mouth. The Garrett Ranch, 5 miles east of town. Thomas always said we would build a house there, raise our children there, grow old together. I used to dream about it, about what our life would be like. I was such a fool. You were not a fool, Xander said firmly. You trusted someone you loved. That is not foolish, that is human. Thomas was the fool for not seeing what he had, for throwing away someone like you for a pretty smile and a moment of weakness. Julia stopped walking and turned to face him. You do not even know me, Mr. Owens. How can you say what Thomas threw away? Xander met her gaze steadily. I know you spent 8 months caring for your dying aunt instead of leaving her to strangers. I know you wrote letters to the man you loved, keeping faith even when you were far away. I know you came back to face this instead of running away to somewhere new. That tells me plenty about who you are, Miss Catherine. Julia felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. I should go see my family. I cannot avoid them forever. Would you like me to walk with you? Xander offered. Or would you prefer to face them alone? Alone, I think, Julia said after a moment. But thank you, Mr. Owens. You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect. Xander, he said. Please call me Xander, and if you need anything at all, my ranch is the one with the white fence posts along the North Road. Anyone in town can tell you how to find it. Julia watched him walk away, his long stride easy and confident, and felt a small flicker of something that was not quite hope, but was not quite despair either. Then she turned toward her family home, steeling herself for what was to come. The Catherine house sat at the end of Maple Street, a modest 2-story structure with a wide porch and a garden that her mother tended with obsessive care. Julia stood at the gate for a long moment, gathering her courage before pushing it open and walking up the path. Her mother answered before she could knock, as though she had been watching for Julia's arrival. Eleanor Catherine was 52 years old, with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much disappointment in life. "Julia," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "you came home. Did you think I would not?" Julia asked, hearing the edge in her own voice. "I hoped you would give yourself time to adjust," her mother said, stepping back to let Julia enter. "This has been difficult for everyone." Julia walked into the familiar parlor, seeing the worn furniture and faded curtains that had been part of her childhood. Everything looked the same, and yet everything had changed. "Difficult for everyone?" she repeated, her voice rising. "How has this been difficult for Margaret? She got what she wanted. She got my future." "Julia, please," her mother said, wringing her hands. "You do not understand. Things happened so quickly. Margaret and Thomas, they fell in love, and it was not something either of them planned." "Love," Julia said, the word like poison on her tongue. "They fell in love in the 8 months I was gone, taking care of Aunt Clara while she died slowly and painfully. They fell in love while I was writing letters to Thomas, telling him how much I missed him, how much I looked forward to coming home." "Did they fall in love before or after he stopped writing back, Mother? I would really like to know." Eleanor sank into a chair, her face crumpling. "I tried to stop it. I told Margaret it was wrong, that she was betraying you. But she said she could not help how she felt, and Thomas said the same thing. They said they tried to fight it, but love is not something you can control." "Where is she?" Julia demanded. "Where is my sister?" "At the Garrett Ranch," her mother said quietly. "With her husband? They have been living there since the wedding." Julia felt like she had been struck. Of course, Margaret was at the ranch, in the house that should have been Julia's, living the life that should have been Julia's. "And father? What does he say about all this?" "Your father washed his hands of it," Eleanor said wearily. "He said it was women's business and refused to get involved. He has been spending most of his time at the lumber yard, avoiding home." Julia stood in the middle of the parlor, looking at the woman who had raised her, and felt a chasm open between them that she was not sure could ever be bridged. "I cannot stay here," she said. "I cannot live in this house and pretend everything is fine." "Where will you go?" her mother asked, panic creeping into her voice. "I have a room at the Golden Bear," Julia said. "I will stay there until I figure out what to do next, but I will not live here, not with you defending what Margaret did, making excuses for her betrayal." "Julia, please," Eleanor begged, tears streaming down her face. "You are my daughter too. I love you. I do not want to lose you over this." "You should have thought of that before you let Margaret marry the man I loved," Julia said, her voice cold. "Before you stood by and watched while she destroyed my life." She walked out before her mother could respond, closing the door firmly behind her. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Julia walked back toward the hotel with her head held high, refusing to let anyone see how completely she was breaking inside. That night, lying in the narrow hotel bed, Julia stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what her life had become. She had left Red Bluff as a woman with a future, with plans and dreams and love. She had returned to find all of it gone, stolen by the two people who should have protected her most. The betrayal was almost incomprehensible in its cruelty. Sleep came in fitful waves, and when Julia woke the next morning, she knew she could not hide in her hotel room. She needed to confront Thomas, needed to hear from his own mouth why he had done this. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, pinned her hair up with steady hands, and set out for the Garrett Ranch as the morning sun climbed over the hills. The 5-mile walk took over an hour, but Julia welcomed the time to think, to prepare herself for what she would say. The ranch came into view gradually, the large main house and surrounding outbuildings looking prosperous and well-maintained. Thomas's father had built the ranch from nothing, and Thomas had always been proud of his inheritance, proud of the wealth and status it gave him in Red Bluff society. Julia was halfway up the drive when she saw them. Thomas and Margaret standing on the porch, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. They looked happy, content, and something inside Julia snapped. "Thomas Garrett," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "I want to talk to you." They both turned, and Julia saw the guilt flash across Thomas's handsome face before he schooled it into a mask of false concern. Margaret went pale, her hand flying to her throat. Thomas was 27, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and blue eyes that Julia had once thought were the most beautiful thing in the world. Now she saw the weakness in his chin, the arrogance in his bearing, the selfishness that had always been there, but that she had been too blind to recognize. "Julia," he said, coming down the steps with Margaret trailing behind him. "I am glad you came. We need to talk about this. Clear the air." "Clear the air?" Julia repeated, incredulous. "Is that what you think this is? A simple misunderstanding that can be cleared up with a conversation?" "I know you are upset," Thomas said, his voice maddeningly calm, "and you have every right to be. But what happened between Margaret and me? It was not something we planned. We fell in love, Julia. Sometimes these things just happen." Julia looked at her sister, seeing the guilt and defiance warring in Margaret's pretty face. Margaret had always been small and delicate, with blonde hair and blue eyes that made her look like a china doll. Men had always fallen over themselves to help her, to please her, and Margaret had learned early how to use that to her advantage. "You fell in love," Julia said flatly. "While I was watching our aunt die, holding her hand while she coughed up blood, writing you letters about our future, you fell in love with my sister." "How romantic." "Julia, please," Margaret said, finding her voice. "I never meant to hurt you. I tried to fight my feelings for Thomas, I truly did. But we spent so much time together while you were gone, and he was so sad and lonely without you. And I was trying to comfort him. And it just happened." "You were trying to comfort him," Julia said, her voice deadly quiet. "Is that what you call it? Stealing your sister's intended, destroying her future, breaking every vow of sisterhood and loyalty. You were comforting him?" "It was not like that," Thomas said, stepping forward. "Margaret and we realized we were better suited for each other. You and I, Julia, we were together because it was expected, because everyone thought we made a good match. But with Margaret, it is different. It is real." Julia stared at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "You are a coward," she said. "A weak, selfish coward who could not even be honest with me. You stopped writing, stopped answering my letters, and I told myself you were busy with the ranch, that you missed me as much as I missed you. But you were courting my sister, making love to my sister, planning a life with my sister, and you did not have the courage to tell me the truth." "What good would it have done?" Thomas demanded, his mask slipping to show irritation beneath. "You were in Sacramento. I was here, and things changed. I did not set out to fall in love with Margaret, but I did, and I am not going to apologize for following my heart." "Your heart," Julia said, and laughed bitterly. "You do not have a heart, Thomas. You have vanity and lust and a complete disregard for anyone but yourself. I was a fool to ever love you. But thank God I found out what you are before I married you and wasted my entire life on a man who does not understand the meaning of loyalty." She turned to Margaret, who was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "And you," Julia said, "you are my sister. You have known me your entire life. You knew how much I loved Thomas, how much I was looking forward to our life together. And you took him anyway because you wanted him, because you have always needed to be the center of attention, the most desired, the most admired. I hope he makes you happy, Margaret. I hope he was worth destroying our relationship over, because you and I are done. You are dead to me." "Julia, please." Margaret sobbed. "I am still your sister. You cannot just stop loving me. Watch me," Julia said, and turned on her heel, walking away from the ranch, from Thomas and Margaret, from the life she had imagined for herself. She made it about a mile down the road before the tears came, hot and fierce, blurring her vision. She stumbled off the path and sat down hard on a large rock, burying her face in her hands and letting herself cry for the first time since receiving the telegram. She cried for the loss of Thomas, for the betrayal of her sister, for the future that would never be. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and hollow and exhausted. "Miss Catherine?" Julia looked up to see Xander Owens riding toward her on a beautiful bay horse, concern etched on his weathered face. He dismounted smoothly and approached her carefully, as though she were a wild animal that might bolt. "I am fine," Julia said automatically, wiping at her face. "No, you are not," Xander said gently. "And you do not have to pretend with me. What happened?" "I went to see Thomas," Julia said, her voice raw. "I needed to hear it from him, needed to understand why. But there is no reason that makes sense, no explanation that makes it better. He just stopped loving me and started loving her, and I am supposed to accept that because you cannot control love." That is what they said. You cannot control who you love. Xander sat down on the rock beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "That is a coward's excuse," he said. "Love is not just a feeling, it is a choice. You choose to honor your commitments. You choose to value loyalty over momentary attraction. You choose to be a person of integrity. Thomas Garrett made his choices, and they show exactly what kind of man he is." Julia looked at him, at this man who barely knew her, but who seemed to understand exactly what she needed to hear. "How do you know so much about betrayal?" she asked. "You said you lost someone important." Xander was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the golden hills. "Her name was Sarah," he said finally. "We were engaged to be married, had the date set and everything. Then I got hurt in a cattle drive, broke my leg badly, and the doctor said I might never walk right again. Sarah came to visit me once in the hospital, and I could see it in her eyes, the fear that I would be a burden, that she would be stuck taking care of an invalid. 2 weeks later, she sent me a letter saying she could not marry me, that she had to think of her future. 6 months after that, she married a banker from Sacramento." "I am sorry," Julia said softly. "Don't be," Xander said, and she could hear the truth in his words. "It hurt like hell at the time, but looking back, I am grateful. If she had married me, I would have spent my life with someone who only loved me when things were easy, who would have abandoned me the first time I really needed her. Better to know who someone is before you tie yourself to them forever." Julia absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. "Do you think that is true for me too? That I should be grateful I found out what Thomas is like before I married him? I think," Xander said carefully, "that you are in pain right now, and pain makes it hard to see anything clearly. But yes, I think eventually you will realize that Thomas did you a favor, even if he did it in the cruelest way possible. He showed you who he really is, and that person is not worthy of you." "You keep saying that," Julia said, "that I am worthy of something better. But maybe I am not. Maybe I am foolish and naive and not good enough to keep the man I loved." Xander turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. "Now you listen to me, Julia Catherine. What happened is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. You were loyal and loving and committed. And those are good things, admirable things. The fact that Thomas could not appreciate them, that he threw them away for your sister, that is his failure, not yours. Do not let his weakness make you doubt your own strength." Something in his words, in the fierce conviction of his voice, reached through Julia's despair. She found herself straightening, found herself meeting his eyes with something like hope. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being here, for saying what I needed to hear. You barely know me, Xander Owens, but you have been kinder to me than people I have known my whole life. Maybe that is because I am not blinded by history and expectations. Xander said, I can see you clearly, see who you really are, and I like what I see. There was something in the way he said it, something warm and genuine that made Julia's breath catch. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a kind stranger, but a man, a good man, who was looking at her with respect and interest, and something that might, in time, become more. Would you like to come see my ranch? Xander asked, breaking the moment. It is just another mile up the north road, and I think you could use some coffee and maybe some decent food. My brother Marcus is a terrible cook, but he can scramble eggs without burning them most of the time. Julia found herself smiling, a real smile, the first since she had received the telegram. I would like that, she said. I would like that very much. Xander helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. Julia felt the solid warmth of him at her back and allowed herself to relax, to trust, to let someone else carry the burden for a little while. The Owens ranch was smaller than the Garrett spread, but well maintained, with sturdy fences and healthy-looking cattle grazing in the pastures. The house was modest, a single-story structure with a wide porch and a roof that looked like it had been recently repaired. Xander helped Julia down from the horse and led her inside, calling out for his brother. Marcus Owens appeared from the back of the house, wiping his hands on a towel. He was younger than Xander, perhaps 24, with the same gray eyes and sun-darkened skin. He looked at Julia with surprise and then recognition. Miss Catherine, he said, nodding respectfully. We heard you were back in town. I am sorry about your troubles. Thank you, Julia said, finding that the words were becoming easier each time she said them. Your brother was kind enough to invite me for coffee. Coffee and breakfast, Xander corrected, moving toward the stove. Sit down, Julia. Make yourself comfortable. Julia sat at the rough wooden table and watched as Xander moved around the small kitchen with easy competence, setting coffee to brew and pulling out eggs and bread. Marcus excused himself to go check on the cattle, leaving them alone. You did not have to do this, Julia said, as Xander cracked eggs into a pan. Feed me, I mean. You have done more than enough already. I know I did not have to, Xander said, glancing at her with a slight smile. I wanted to. Besides, you look like you have not eaten properly in days, and I refuse to let you starve on my watch. Julia realized he was right. She had barely touched food since receiving the telegram, her stomach knotted with anxiety and grief. Now, watching Xander cook, smelling the coffee and eggs, she felt genuine hunger for the first time in days. They ate in comfortable silence, and Julia found herself studying Xander when he was not looking. He was not handsome in the way Thomas was handsome, with no classical features or aristocratic bearing. But there was something solid about him, something trustworthy, and Julia found herself drawn to that in a way she had never been drawn to Thomas's superficial charm. What are you going to do now? Xander asked as they finished eating. Will you stay in Red Bluff? Julia set down her fork, considering. I do not know, she admitted. Part of me wants to leave, to go somewhere new where no one knows about my humiliation. But another part of me refuses to be driven out of my home because of what Thomas and Margaret did. Why should I be the one to leave? You should not, Xander said firmly. This is your town as much as theirs, more even. You were born here, you have every right to stay. But what would I do? Julia asked. I cannot live at the hotel forever, and I will not go back to my parents' house. I have a little money saved, but not enough to support myself indefinitely. Xander leaned back in his chair thinking. Can you keep books? Do figures and accounts? Yes, Julia said, surprised. I helped my father with the accounts at his lumberyard for years before he hired a professional bookkeeper. Why? Because Marcus and I are terrible at it, Xander said with a rueful smile. We can run cattle and fix fences and birth calves, but when it comes to keeping track of expenses and income and all the paperwork that goes with running a ranch, we are hopeless. We have been talking about hiring someone to help, but we have not found the right person. If you are interested, the job is yours. Julia stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You would hire me? Just like that? Just like that, Xander confirmed. You need work, we need help, and I trust you to do the job right. It would not be much at first, maybe 2 or 3 days a week, but it would give you some income and a reason to stay in Red Bluff if you want to. Why are you doing this? Julia asked, her voice breaking. Why are you being so kind to me? Xander met her eyes steadily. Because you deserve kindness, because I see someone who has been hurt and who needs help, and I have the ability to help, so I will. And maybe because I like you, Julia Catherine, and I would like to get to know you better, if you would allow it. Julia felt warmth spread through her chest, something that was not quite attraction, but was not quite friendship either. I would like that too, she said softly. And yes, I will take the job. Thank you, Xander, for everything. Over the following weeks, Julia settled into a new routine. She spent 3 days a week at the Owens Ranch, working in the small office Xander set up for her in a corner of the house, organizing their chaotic records and creating a proper bookkeeping system. The work was satisfying in a way she had not expected, giving her a sense of purpose and accomplishment that she had not felt in months. The other days she spent in town, gradually rebuilding her life. She found a small house to rent on the edge of Red Bluff, a 2-room cottage that was old but clean and cheap enough that she could afford it with her wages from the ranch. She bought furniture and supplies from the general store, ignoring the whispers and stares of the townspeople, holding her head high and refusing to be ashamed of what had happened to her. She saw Thomas and Margaret occasionally, driving through town in Thomas's fancy carriage, and each time the sight of them was like a knife to her heart. But each time, the pain was a little less, the wound a little less raw. She was healing, slowly but surely, and she knew she had Xander to thank for much of that. Xander was patient and kind, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give, but always there when she needed him. He taught her about ranching, taking her out to see the cattle, and explaining the intricacies of breeding and raising livestock. He introduced her to his friends and neighbors, making sure she felt included and valued. And he talked to her, really talked to her, about his dreams and fears and hopes for the future. Julia found herself looking forward to the days she spent at the ranch, found herself thinking about Xander at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, whether he was thinking of her too. It was different from what she had felt for Thomas, less dramatic and intense, but deeper somehow, more real. One evening in late October, Julia was working late at the ranch, finishing up the monthly accounts by lamplight. Xander came in from checking on a pregnant cow, his hair damp from washing up at the pump outside. You are still working? He asked, coming to stand beside her desk. Julia, it is nearly 9 o'clock. You should have gone home hours ago. I wanted to finish this, Julia said, gesturing at the ledger spread before her. Besides, I do not mind staying late. It is peaceful here. Xander pulled up a chair and sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Julia, can I ask you something? Of course, Julia said, setting down her pen. How are you doing? Really doing, I mean, not just what you tell people when they ask. Julia considered the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. I am doing better, she said finally. There are still days when I wake up and feel the loss all over again, when I see Thomas and Margaret and want to scream at the unfairness of it all. But those days are getting fewer. Mostly, I am just trying to figure out who I am now, who I want to be, without Thomas and without the future I thought I would have. And who do you want to be? Xander asked softly. Julia looked at him, at his kind eyes and honest face, and felt something shift inside her. I want to be someone who does not need a man to define her worth, she said. Someone who can stand on her own 2 feet and build a life she is proud of. But I also want to be someone who can love again, who can trust again when the right person comes along. And has the right person come along? Xander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Julia felt her heart begin to race. They were crossing into new territory, territory that was both thrilling and terrifying. I think maybe he has, she said. But I am scared, Xander. I am scared of being hurt again, scared of trusting my judgment when I was so wrong about Thomas. Xander reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. I am not Thomas, he said firmly. I would never betray you the way he did. Never treat your heart as something disposable. If you give me a chance, Julia, I swear I will spend every day proving to you that you can trust me. Julia looked down at their joined hands, feeling the rightness of it, the way they fit together. I want to give you a chance, she said. But I need time, Xander. I need to be sure. Take all the time you need, Xander said, squeezing her hand gently. I will be here, waiting for as long as it takes. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the lamplight casting soft shadows on the walls. Then Julia stood, gathering her things, and Xander walked her out to her horse. Be careful riding home, he said as he helped her mount. The road can be tricky in the dark. I will, Julia promised, looking down at him. On impulse, she reached down and touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard beneath her fingers. Thank you, Xander, for being patient with me. Always, he said, covering her hand with his. Good night, Julia. She rode home through the darkness, her heart lighter than it had been in months, and allowed herself to imagine a future that included Xander Owens. November arrived with cooler weather and the beginning of the rainy season. Julia continued her work at the ranch, and gradually her relationship with Xander deepened. They went for walks together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He brought her wildflowers he found while checking the cattle, and she baked him cookies that he devoured with boyish enthusiasm. It was sweet and gentle and completely different from her courtship with Thomas. One Sunday afternoon, Julia was in town buying supplies when she saw Margaret standing outside the general store, looking pale and drawn. Julia's first instinct was to turn and walk away, but something in her sister's expression stopped her. Julia, Margaret said, her voice trembling. Please, can we talk? We have nothing to talk about, Julia said coldly. Please, Margaret begged. Just 5 minutes. I need to tell you something. Against her better judgment, Julia followed Margaret to a quiet spot behind the store, away from prying eyes and gossiping tongues. What do you want? Julia asked, keeping her voice hard. Margaret wrapped her arms around herself, looking younger and more vulnerable than Julia had ever seen her. I made a terrible mistake, she whispered. Thomas is not who I thought he was. He is cruel and selfish, and he makes me feel small and worthless. I think he only married me because I flattered his ego, because having 2 sisters fight over him made him feel important. Julia felt a surge of bitter satisfaction, followed quickly by guilt. What do you want me to say, Margaret? That I told you so? That you deserve to be unhappy? I do deserve it, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. I betrayed you in the worst way possible, and now I am paying for it. But Julia, I am scared. Thomas has a temper, and when he drinks, which he does more and more often, he says terrible things. I am trapped in that house with him, and I do not know what to do. Julia felt her anger begin to crack, replaced by the instinctive protectiveness she had always felt for her younger sister. Has he hurt you? She asked sharply. Not yet, Margaret said, but I think it is only a matter of time. He grabbed my arm last week hard enough to leave bruises, and the look in his eyes scared me. Julia, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I do not know who else to turn to. Mother just tells me to be a better wife, and Father will not even speak to me. Julia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before her. She could walk away, let Margaret face the consequences of her choices alone. It would be justified, even deserved. But Margaret was still her sister, still the little girl Julia had protected from bullies and comforted during thunderstorms. I need to think about this, Julia said finally. I cannot just forgive you, Margaret. What you did hurt me more than I can express. But I do not want to see you hurt either. Give me some time. Thank you, Margaret said, reaching for Julia's hand. Julia pulled back, not ready for that kind of contact yet. Time, Julia repeated. That is all I can promise right now. She walked away, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. Part of her felt vindicated knowing that Thomas was showing his true colors to Margaret, but another part of her felt only sadness, sadness that her sister was trapped in a miserable marriage, sadness that Thomas had hurt yet another person with his selfishness. That evening, she told Xander everything. They were sitting on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sun set over the hills, and Julia found the words pouring out of her. What should I do? She asked when she had finished. Part of me wants to help her, but part of me thinks she made her bed and should have to lie in it. Xander was quiet for a moment, considering. I think you have to do what you can live with, he said finally. If you turn your back on Margaret and something bad happens to her, will you be able to forgive yourself? And if you help her, even after what she did, will you be able to move forward without resenting her forever? I do not know, Julia admitted. I am so angry at her still. But she is my sister, and I do not want her to be hurt or worse. Then maybe the question is not whether to help her, but how, Xander said. You do not have to forgive her or let her back into your life fully, but you can make sure she is safe. Maybe help her find a way out of the marriage if that is what she wants. Julia looked at him with renewed appreciation. How do you always know the right thing to say? I do not, Xander said with a slight smile. I just try to think about what would help, what would make the situation better rather than worse. And I care about you, Julia, so I care about the things that affect you, even when those things are complicated. Julia reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. I am falling in love with you, she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. I did not mean to, did not think I was ready, but I am. I love you, Xander Owens. Xander turned to her, his eyes bright with emotion. I have been in love with you since the first day I saw you standing on that street corner, looking lost and heartbroken. I wanted to take away your pain, to show you that not all men are like Thomas Garrett. And then I got to know you, and I fell even harder, because you are strong and brave and kind, even to people who have hurt you. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet, and Julia felt something break open inside her, something that had been locked away since the telegram arrived. She kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and love into the gesture, and when they finally pulled apart, she was crying, but they were good tears, healing tears. I love you, she said again, and I am scared, but I want this. I want you. Then you have me, Xander said, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. For as long as you want me, I am yours. They sat together on the porch as the stars came out, making plans for the future, for their future. Xander wanted to marry her, he said, but he would wait until she was ready, until she was certain. Julia said she needed a few more months, needed to be absolutely sure she was choosing him for the right reasons, and not just as a replacement for Thomas. Xander agreed without hesitation, content to let their relationship grow at its own pace. In the following weeks, Julia did what she could for Margaret. She helped her sister open a bank account in her own name and secreted away small amounts of money from the household funds. She gave Margaret the address of a women's boarding house in Sacramento where she could go if she needed to leave suddenly. And she made sure Margaret knew that if things became dangerous, she could come to Julia for help, no matter what had passed between them. It was not forgiveness, not exactly, but it was compassion, and Julia found that offering it helped her heal in ways she had not expected. By helping Margaret, she was proving to herself that Thomas's betrayal had not made her hard or bitter, that she could still be kind, even to those who had wronged her. Christmas came, and Xander invited Julia to spend it with him and Marcus at the ranch. They decorated a small pine tree with strings of popcorn and carved wooden ornaments, and Xander gave Julia a beautiful leather-bound journal, telling her she should write down her thoughts and feelings, her journey from heartbreak to healing. Julia gave him a watch that had belonged to her grandfather, a symbol of time and trust and commitment. When he opened it, she saw tears in his eyes, and she knew she had chosen well. "I am ready," she said that night as they stood together under the stars. "I am ready to marry you, Xander, if you will still have me." "If I will still have you," Xander repeated, laughing. "Julia Catherine, I would marry you tomorrow if you would let me." "Then let us marry in the spring," Julia said, "when the hills are green and the wildflowers are blooming. I want to start our life together with hope and new beginnings." Xander swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. "Spring it is," he said, setting her down and kissing her soundly. "I promise you, Julia, I will spend the rest of my life making you happy." Winter passed slowly, with Julia and Xander making plans for their wedding and their future. They decided to expand the ranch house, adding 2 more rooms so they would have space for the children they both wanted. Julia continued to work as the ranch bookkeeper, finding genuine satisfaction in the work and in being part of building something lasting. In February, Margaret appeared at Julia's cottage late one evening, her face bruised and her dress torn. Julia took one look at her sister and pulled her inside, sending word to Xander immediately. "He hit me," Margaret said, her voice hollow. "I burned the roast, and he hit me across the face, and then he hit me again when I tried to get away. I grabbed what I could and ran. I cannot go back there, Julia. I cannot." "You will not," Julia said firmly. "You will stay here tonight, and tomorrow we will figure out what to do." Xander arrived within the hour, and together they made a plan. Margaret would go to the boarding house in Sacramento, and Julia would give her enough money to support herself for a few months while she looked for work. Xander knew a lawyer who could help Margaret petition for divorce on grounds of abuse, though they all knew it would be a difficult and scandalous process. "Thank you," Margaret said to Julia before she left on the morning stage. "I know I do not deserve your help, and I know I can never make up for what I did to you. But thank you for being a better person than I was." "We all make mistakes," Julia said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "Some of us just make bigger ones than others. Learn from this, Margaret. Become someone better." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face, and climbed into the stage. Julia watched her go, feeling the last threads of anger and resentment finally release. She had helped her sister not because Margaret deserved it, but because Julia was the kind of person who helped, who showed compassion even when it was hard. That was who she wanted to be, who she chose to be. Thomas Garrett tried to make trouble, spreading rumors about Margaret abandoning him and Julia corrupting her sister. But the bruises Margaret had worn told their own story, and most of the town sided with the Catherine sisters. Thomas's reputation suffered, and his standing in Red Bluff society diminished considerably. Julia found she did not care what happened to Thomas. He had shown his true nature to everyone who mattered, and that was punishment enough. She was too busy planning her wedding and her future to waste time thinking about the past. The wedding took place on a bright April morning in 1883, exactly 7 months after Julia had returned to Red Bluff and found her life in ruins. Now she stood in the small church on Main Street, wearing a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and watched Xander Owens walk down the aisle toward her. He looked handsome in his new suit, his hair neatly combed and his face shining with love and happiness. Marcus stood beside him as best man, and Julia's friend from the general store, Sarah Miller, stood as her bridesmaid. Julia's parents were there, her mother crying softly, and her father looking proud but uncomfortable. Margaret sent a telegram from Sacramento wishing them well. The minister spoke about love and commitment and the challenges of building a life together, and Julia found herself truly listening, truly understanding the weight and beauty of the vows she was about to take. Do you, Julia Ann Catherine, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part? I do, Julia said, her voice clear and strong, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Do you, Xander William Owens, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part? I do, Xander said, his eyes never leaving Julia's face. Then by the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Xander kissed her tenderly, and Julia felt the last pieces of her broken heart knit back together, stronger than before. When they pulled apart, the small congregation erupted in applause, and Julia and Xander walked down the aisle together, ready to begin their new life. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by neighbors and friends. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Julia found herself happier than she had ever been, even in the early days with Thomas. This happiness was deeper, more solid, built on truth and trust rather than illusion. As the sun began to set, Xander pulled Julia away from the celebration, leading her to a quiet spot overlooking the pastures. I have something for you, he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. I was going to wait, but I cannot hold on to it any longer. Julia unfolded the paper and saw that it was a deed, transferring ownership of half the ranch to her name. Xander, I cannot accept this, she said, shocked. The ranch is yours and Marcus's. Marcus and I talked about it, Xander said. He agrees that if you are going to be working to build this place up, you should own part of it. You are not just my wife, Julia. You are my partner, and I want you to have security and independence. If something ever happened to me, I want to know you would be taken care of. Julia threw her arms around his neck, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness and generosity. I love you so much, she whispered. I cannot believe I ever thought Thomas was what I wanted. You are everything he could never be. And you are everything I ever dreamed of, Xander said, holding her close. I promise you, Julia, I will never give you reason to doubt me, never make you question your worth. You are the most precious thing in my life, and I will treasure you always. They kissed as the sun sank below the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange, and Julia felt complete in a way she had never felt before. The years that followed were good ones. Julia and Xander worked together to build the ranch into a thriving operation, with Julia's business acumen complementing Xander's practical skills. They hired additional help and expanded their herd, and within a few years, the Owens Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. In the spring of 1884, Julia discovered she was pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult, with months of sickness and discomfort, but Xander was attentive and patient, caring for her with unwavering devotion. In December, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named James, after Xander's father. Holding her son for the first time, Julia felt a fierce protective love unlike anything she had ever experienced. She looked at Xander, who was gazing at the baby with wonder and tenderness, and felt grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. He is perfect, Xander said, carefully touching the baby's tiny hand. You are amazing, Julia. Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this. Thank you for being the kind of man I want to raise children with, Julia said. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Emily Rose. She had Julia's dark hair and Xander's gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Margaret eventually divorced Thomas and rebuilt her life in Sacramento, working as a seamstress and slowly regaining her self-respect. She and Julia exchanged letters occasionally, maintaining a cordial but distant relationship. Julia hoped that someday they might be closer again, but she was content with what they had. Thomas remarried a few years later to a woman from San Francisco, and the couple moved away from Red Bluff. Julia heard about it through town gossip and felt only relief that he was gone, no longer a constant reminder of her past mistakes. Julia's parents grew older and softer, and gradually they became part of Julia and Xander's life, doting grandparents who spoiled James and Emily shamelessly. Julia forgave her mother for her role in the Margaret situation, understanding that Eleanor had been caught between two daughters and had not known how to handle an impossible situation. As the years passed, Julia sometimes thought about the woman she had been when she first returned to Red Bluff, heartbroken and lost and convinced her life was over. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. Julia had been forged in the fire of betrayal and heartbreak and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander and Julia sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. James was 9 now, a serious boy who loved the cattle and spent every free moment following his father around the ranch. Emily was 7, wild and fearless, with a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked, his arm around Julia's shoulders. "The way things happened, I mean. Do you ever wish you had married Thomas, had the life you planned?" Julia looked at him, at the man who had saved her when she was drowning, who had shown her what real love and partnership looked like. "Never," she said firmly. "What happened with Thomas was the best thing that could have happened to me, because it led me to you. Every difficult moment, every heartbreak, was worth it to end up here, with you and our children and this life we have built." "I love you, Julia Owens," Xander said, kissing her forehead. "More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow." "I love you too," Julia said, leaning into his embrace. "Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me time to heal, for loving me even when I was broken." "You were never broken," Xander said. "You were just hurt. There is a difference. Broken things cannot be fixed, but hurt things can heal. And you healed beautifully." As the sun set over the California hills, Julia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had lost everything she thought she wanted and had found something infinitely better in the process. She had learned that love was not about grand gestures and passionate declarations, but about showing up every day, about choosing your partner over and over again, about building something lasting and true. She had learned that betrayal, as painful as it was, could lead to growth and transformation. She had learned that she was stronger than she knew, capable of surviving heartbreak and building a new life from the ashes of the old. Most importantly, she had learned that the right love, the true love, was worth waiting for. Xander had been worth waiting for, worth healing for, worth taking a chance on even when she was terrified of being hurt again. In 1893, 10 years after their wedding, Julia and Xander celebrated with a large party at the ranch. Their children were teenagers now, James helping to run the ranch and Emily showing a talent for horses that impressed even the most experienced cowboys. Marcus had married a few years earlier and had built his own small house on the property, and his children played with Julia's, keeping the ranch full of life and laughter. Julia's hair had threads of silver now, and Xander's face was more weathered, but the love between them had only deepened with time. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed goodnight every evening, still looked at each other with the wonder and appreciation of people who knew how lucky they were. The party was in full swing when Julia noticed a young woman standing at the edge of the crowd looking uncertain. She was pretty and well-dressed, and Julia did not recognize her. Curious, Julia approached her. "Hello?" Julia said warmly. "I am Julia Owens. Are you friend of James or Emily?" The woman smiled nervously. "Actually, I am here to see you. My name is Catherine Garrett. I am Thomas's daughter." Julia felt her heart skip a beat. Thomas's daughter. She hadn't thought about Thomas in years, had not wondered about his life or his family. "I see," she said carefully. What can I do for you, Miss Garrett? I know this is strange, Catherine said quickly, but my father died last month, and before he did, he asked me to deliver a letter to you. He said it was important that he had carried the guilt of what he did to you for 20 years and needed you to know he was sorry. She held out an envelope, and Julia took it with trembling hands. She looked at Xander, who had noticed the exchange and come to stand beside her. What is it? He asked quietly. A letter from Thomas, Julia said. He died last month, apparently. Do you want to read it? Xander asked. Or should I throw it away? Julia looked at the envelope, at Thomas's familiar handwriting on the front. Part of her wanted to tear it up unread, to refuse him this final attempt at connection. But another part of her was curious, wondered what he could possibly have to say after all these years. I will read it, she decided. But later, when I am ready. She tucked the letter into her pocket and turned back to Catherine. Thank you for bringing this. Would you like to stay for the party? We have plenty of food, and you are welcome to join us. Catherine looked surprised but pleased. I would like that. Thank you, Mrs. Owens. Julia introduced Catherine to her children and then returned to Xander's side. That was unexpected, she said. Are you all right? Xander asked, studying her face. I am, Julia said, and realized it was true. Whatever Thomas has to say, it cannot hurt me anymore. That part of my life is so far in the past, it feels like it happened to someone else. That night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Julia sat on the porch with Xander and opened the letter. Her hands were steady as she unfolded the paper and began to read. Dear Julia, Thomas had written in a shaky hand, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I am not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that I have thought about you often over the years, and I have come to understand that letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. Margaret and I were miserable together, and our marriage ended badly, as I am sure you know. I remarried and had children, and I have tried to be a better man, a better husband and father than I was to you and Margaret. But I have never forgotten what I did, how I hurt you, and I have carried that guilt with me every day. You deserved so much better than how I treated you, and I hope that you found happiness with someone who appreciated what an extraordinary woman you are. I am sorry, Julia, for everything. I hope you can forgive me, even if I cannot forgive myself. Thomas. Julia read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. She felt no surge of emotion, no anger or sadness or satisfaction. She felt only a mild pity for the man Thomas had been, so insecure and selfish that he had destroyed something good for a moment of flattery. What did he say? Xander asked gently. That he was sorry, Julia said, that he regretted what he did and hoped I found happiness. And did you? Xander asked, a slight smile on his face. Find happiness, I mean. Julia looked at her husband, at the man who had given her everything Thomas never could, and smiled. I found more than happiness, she said. I found love, real love, the kind that lasts. I found a partner and a friend and the father of my children. I found a life I am proud of, a life I built with my own hands. So yes, I found happiness and so much more. Do you forgive him? Xander asked. Julia thought about it, really thought about it. I do not know if I forgive him exactly, she said slowly, but I do not hate him anymore. I do not feel anything for him, really, except gratitude that he did not have the strength to love me, because it meant I was free to find you. She took the letter and walked to the fireplace, where embers still glowed from the evening fire. She tossed the letter into the flames and watched it catch, watched Thomas's words turn to ash and smoke. The past is gone, she said, returning to Xander and settling into his arms. All that matters is the present and the future, and both of those belong to us. Xander held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. I love you, Julia Owens. Thank you for choosing me. for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are. I love you too, Julia said, always and forever. They sat together in the darkness, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of heartbreak and had built something beautiful and lasting. Julia thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the devastation of reading that telegram to the peace and joy of this moment. She had learned that betrayal could be survived, that heartbreak could heal, that endings could become beginnings. She had learned that sometimes the worst thing that could happen turned out to be a blessing in disguise, forcing you onto a path you never would have chosen, but that led somewhere better than you could have imagined. Most of all, she had learned that love, real love, was not about passion or drama or grand romantic gestures. It was about showing up every day, about choosing your partner in the small moments as well as the big ones, about building a life together brick by brick, day by day, year by year. As Julia grew older, she often thought about young women facing heartbreak and betrayal, and she wished she could tell them what she had learned, that the pain would not last forever, that they were stronger than they knew, that something better was waiting for them if they could just hold on and keep moving forward. She and Xander grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They watched their children grow up, marry, and have children of their own. James took over running the ranch, expanding it even further, while Emily married a doctor and settled in Sacramento. Though she visited often, Julia continued to keep the ranch books well into her 60s, finding satisfaction in work and purpose even as her body slowed. Xander remained by her side, still holding her hand, still kissing her goodnight, still looking at her with love and appreciation. In 1910, at the age of 69, Julia became seriously ill. The doctor said it was her heart, that it was simply wearing out after a long and full life. Julia faced the news with calm acceptance, knowing she had lived a good life, a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. Xander never left her side during those final weeks. He held her hand, told her stories, reminded her of all the good times they had shared. James and Emily came with their families, filling the house with life and love. On a warm evening in late June, Julia opened her eyes to find Xander sitting beside her bed, his aged face still handsome to her, his gray eyes still full of love. "I am not afraid," she said, her voice weak but clear. "I have had a good life, Xander. A wonderful life, all because of you. Because of us," Xander corrected, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You made my life worth living, Julia. You gave me everything that mattered." "Promise me something," Julia said, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had left. "Promise me you will be happy after I am gone. Promise me you will not spend whatever time you have left grieving for me." "I promise I will try," Xander said. "But it will be hard living without you. You have been my heart for nearly 30 years. And you have been mine," Julia said. "But I will always be with you, Xander, in the ranch we built together, in our children and grandchildren, in every sunset and every moment of beauty. Death cannot end what we have, because what we have is eternal." She closed her eyes, and with Xander's hand in hers and her family surrounding her, Julia Catherine Owens took her last breath, leaving behind a legacy of love and strength and resilience. Xander kept his promise. He grieved, as anyone would who had lost their other half, but he did not let the grief consume him. He continued to run the ranch with James, played with his grandchildren, told stories about Julia that kept her memory alive and vivid. He lived another 5 years, and when his time came, he died peacefully in his sleep, a smile on his face. James, cleaning out his father's belongings afterward, found a journal that Xander had kept, filled with entries about Julia, about their life together, about the day a heartbroken woman came back to Red Bluff and changed his life forever. The last entry, written just days before Xander's death, read simply, "I am ready to go now, ready to see my Julia again. We had 30 wonderful years together on this earth, and now we will have eternity. I am the luckiest man who ever lived because I was loved by Julia Catherine, and I got to love her back. That is all that matters in the end. Love is all that matters. James read the words to his sister, and they both cried for the parents they had lost, for the love story that had shaped their lives, for the example of devotion and partnership that Julia and Xander had provided. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the Owens family, each generation adding to the legacy that Julia and Xander had built. And though the years passed and the world changed, the story of Julia Catherine, the woman who had her heart broken and found true love in the aftermath, was told and retold, a reminder that endings can become beginnings, that heartbreak can lead to healing, and that the right love is always worth waiting for. In Red Bluff, California, where the Sacramento River winds through golden hills and the summer sun beats down on dusty streets, people still speak of Julia and Xander Owens, the couple who proved that real love, the kind that lasts, is built not on passion or promises, but on trust and respect and choosing each other every single day. Their story became legend, a testament to the power of resilience and the transformative nature of true love, and a reminder that sometimes the worst thing that can happen turns out to be the best thing in disguise.